They say blood is life, but in the right mouth, it becomes something else entirely. This October, we won't chase the monster in the shadows. We'll let him in. We'll feel his gaze, his breath, his hunger dressed in silk. From the mud-soaked corpses of old village tales to the velvet-coated predators of Gothic novels, vampires have never just been about death. They've been about desire. About us, our beauty, our fear, our darkest cravings. I'm Carissa, and welcome to Dark Thirst. Tonight, we begin at the beginning, not with Dracula, not with Edward Cullen, but with monsters. Bloated, mud-soaked corpses scratching at windows. Demons with breasts that smothered infants. Spirits that wore the faces of the dead. These are the vampires before the velvet, before the silk. But soon, they would learn to smile. They would learn to seduce. Across cultures, the vampire began as a warning, not a lover. In Slavic folklore, the opier was not beautiful, but bloated, its stomach swollen with stolen blood. In Greece, the vrikolakas was a corpse that wandered after death, chewing noisily at its shroud. These creatures weren't there to seduce, they were there to terrify. Historians like Paul Barber, in Vampires, Burial, and Death, note that such legends often arose from real corpses, bodies that looked unnaturally preserved, or mouths stained dark after death. In pre-scientific communities, a body that didn't decompose properly became a suspect. It was clear that something unnatural was sustaining it. There are recorded cases. In 1732, in the Serbian village of Medvedja, officials investigated supposed vampire attacks. They exhumed corpses said to be fresh with blood at their mouths. And so, stakes were driven through hearts. These accounts traveled across Europe like wildfire, sparking the so-called vampire controversy of the 18th century. But here's the thing. None of these monsters were beautiful. None were aristocratic. So what happened? The shift came with literature, with the Romantics, with obsession. In 1819, a young doctor named John Polidori published a story that would change everything. The Vampire, spelled Vampyre. His vampire wasn't a corpse scratching in the dirt. He was Lord Ruthven, aristocratic, pale, magnetic. Ruthven seduces women, drains them, and leaves them ruined. Scholars argue Ruthven was modeled after Polidori's own employer, the poet, Lord Byron, whose dark charisma and sexual scandals made him the perfect prototype for the seductive vampire. A quote from Polidori's The Vampire. It was not that his sight had anything singular in it. It was that it had a peculiar expression of a malignant feeling, which at times froze the blood in the veins of the beholder. This was new. The vampire was no longer just a monster. He was a gentleman predator, and once the vampire entered high society, he never left. But to understand how Ruthven was born, we need to go back to the summer of 1816, the year without a summer. A volcanic eruption in far-off Indonesia had dimmed the skies of Europe, leaving Switzerland under constant storms and gloom. At Villa Diodati, on the shores of Lake Geneva, a notorious group gathered. Lord Byron, his personal physician, John Polidori, the young poet, Percy B. Shelley, and the brilliant 18-year-old Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin, soon to be Mary Shelley. Alongside them was Mary's stepsister, Claire Claremont, entangled in Byron's orbit. Rain trapped them indoors, thunder shaking the villa. To pass the time, they read German ghost stories aloud from a collection called Phantasmagoriana. Then Byron, restless, proposed a game. Each of us will write a ghost story. From that night came two of the most enduring figures in horror, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, born from her vision of a scientist haunted by his own creation, and Polidori's The Vampire. Polidori's diary, dated June 1816, paraphrased from his notes. The nobleman began a fragment about a vampire. The physician completed the tale. Byron had began a fragment of a vampire tale, but Polidori, tired of being overshadowed, seized it. He turned Byron's sketch into something fuller, stranger, and published it 2 years later. And so, the first aristocratic vampire, Lord Ruthven, was unleashed into the world. But to understand the bite of Ruthven, we need to understand Byron himself. And Byron was, well, a scandal wrapped in silk. Born into nobility, he strutted through London society as if he owned it. By his early 20s, Byron was infamous for his torrid affairs, with actresses, aristocratic ladies, even rumors of his own half-sister. His publisher once quipped that he was mad, bad, and dangerous to know. And society couldn't look away. Women fainted at his readings. Men whispered his name with both envy and contempt. He was exile, genius, villain, and celebrity all at once. So when Polidori's story hit the press in 1819, introducing a pale, aristocratic vampire with a predatory charm, it struck a chord. Many readers saw Lord Ruthven as Byron himself, a predator in silk stockings, a nobleman who ruined women with a glance. The name Ruthven wasn't even chosen at random. It was borrowed from one of Byron's enemies, making the satire sharper and nastier. A quote from Polidori's The Vampire. A nobleman, more remarkable for his singularities than for his rank, soon attracted the attention of the young and the beautiful. That sentence alone could have been plucked straight from a gossip column about Byron. The Vampire was first published in the New Monthly magazine, with Byron's name attached. Readers were convinced Byron himself had written it, and the story caused a sensation. A vampire penned by Byron, the very man who seemed half monster already? London was obsessed. Polidori eventually fought to claim credit, but by then the damage and the immortality were done. The seductive vampire had been born, not as a corpse clawing from the grave, but as a creature who could glide through drawing rooms, slip into bedchambers, and ruin with a kiss. This was the new terror, that the monster wasn't outside the gates. He was already inside, wearing a gentleman's smile. Fast forward to 1872. In the pages of the dark blue magazine, Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu published a novella called Carmilla. It was the story of a lonely young girl, Laura, living in a secluded castle with her father, when a carriage accident delivers into their care a mysterious, beautiful stranger. Carmilla. An excerpt from Sheridan Le Fanu's Carmilla. Her gaze followed me everywhere, and it was not the kind of look which one forgets to remember. It troubled me, it made me uneasy, and yet it was enchanting. This was no monster of dirt and graveyards. Carmilla is languid, magnetic, entrancing. She stays in Laura's bed, caresses her, whispers love in the night. And then, as girls around the countryside began to sicken and die, we see the truth. Carmilla feeds on Laura's blood. But unlike Dracula, who comes much later, Carmilla is not just about hunger, it's about desire. Le Fanu himself was an Irish writer, sometimes called the Invisible Prince of Victorian ghost stories. His tales often lingered on repression, the supernatural as a mask for things unsaid. By the 1870s, Victorian society was obsessed with propriety. Women were expected to be modest, chaste, passive. Homosexuality was taboo, unspoken, often unthinkable. And here was Carmilla, a female vampire who expresses her desire openly, erotically, towards another woman. A quote from Carmilla. Sometimes, after an hour of apathy, my strange and beautiful companion would take my hand and hold it with a fond pressure, renewed again and again, blushing softly, gazing in my face with languid and burning eyes, and breathing so fast that her dress rose and fell with a tumultuous respiration. For Victorian readers, this wasn't just frightening, it was scandalous. Carmilla embodies two things that terrified the Victorians: women with power and women with desire. The vampire here is not a man invading women's bedrooms. She is the woman, and that flips the whole fear inside out. Laura's unease in the story mirrors how society felt, both horrified and thrilled. Carmilla is dangerous, but also irresistible. Victorian critics often linked her vampirism to disease, especially tuberculosis, which consumed young women in wasting pallor and night sweats. Desire itself was painted as contagious, corrupting, unnatural. Carmilla was not just a monster, she was a mirror held up to forbidden longings. Though Carmilla never achieved the fame of Dracula, it was a quiet revolution. It carved out space for the vampire as an erotic figure, a creature of allure as much as terror. And it left behind questions that still unsettle. What if the thing we fear most is not the monster who breaks into our home, but the one who knows our secret desires? What if what terrifies us is that we might want to be bitten? A quote from Carmilla: "I have been in love with no one, and never shall, unless it should be with you." Carmilla whispers what the Victorians could not. That longing, once voiced, can't be unmade. And then, 1897, Bram Stoker's Dracula. Dracula is many things at once: aristocrat, predator, foreign invader, sexual threat. He is both ancient corpse and charming nobleman. His seduction is terrifying because it undoes boundaries between male and female, between life and death, between purity and corruption. From Jonathan Harker's journal in Dracula: "The fair girl went on her knees and bent over me, fairly gloating. There was a deliberate voluptuousness which was both thrilling and repulsive, and as she arched her neck, she actually licked her lips like an animal." That line captures the essence of Stoker's vampire. Always both, thrilling and repulsive, desire and death. Bram Stoker wasn't a Byronic aristocrat or a reclusive Irish dreamer like Le Fanu. He was a theater manager in London, working for the great actor Henry Irving. But he read widely in folklore, histories, and Gothic novels, and he knew the power of performance. Dracula didn't come from nowhere. It carries the DNA of Polidori's The Vampire's aristocratic predator and Carmilla's seductive menace. But Stoker mixed in his own Irish anxieties, his Protestant fears of Catholic superstition, and the Victorian obsession with degeneration and disease. Stoker was writing at the very end of the 19th century, the fin de siècle, when society was vibrating with anxiety. Britain's empire was vast but shaky. Emigration was rising. Science had uncovered microbes, evolution, and sex in ways that shook morality. And women, the new women, were riding bicycles, writing novels, demanding votes. Into this swirling storm came Count Dracula. The Count arrives from Transylvania not just as a man, but as a metaphor. He is Eastern Europe invading the West. He is superstition invading rational London. He is contagion crossing borders. Victorian readers saw in Dracula the fear of syphilis, of foreigners, of racial taint. His bite is at once sexual and infectious, a violation that spreads. From Dracula, Chapter 16, Lucy's Transformation. She advanced to him with outstretched arms and a wanton smile. Oh my God, how I loathed her! Her eyes blazed with unholy light, and the face became wreathed with a voluptuous smile. This was Lucy Westenra, the sweet, virtuous English rose, now reimagined as a predator, shameless and blazing with hunger. For Victorian readers, it was a nightmare. The pure woman made unholy, desire written openly on her face. The terror of Dracula is not only that he kills, but that he seduces. He blurs gender roles, penetrating men as well as women, draining Jonathan Harker as much as Mina. He creates brides, not corpses. The vampire here is not simply predator, but corrupter. And yet readers could not look away. Dracula's power lies in that double pull, the wish to resist and the secret wish to surrender. A quote from Dracula, and there was a deliberate voluptuousness which was both thrilling and repulsive. I felt in my heart a wicked, burning desire that they would kiss me with those red lips. Jonathan Harker's words are scandalous. He desires the very kiss that horrifies him. That paradox is what gives the vampire his immortal hold. When Dracula appeared in 1897, it landed like a thunderclap. Where Polidori's vampire had shocked and Carmilla had whispered, Dracula roared. It was reviewed as both thrilling and lurid. Some critics dismissed it as vulgar horror. Others praised its ingenuity. But its impact was instant. Within years, stage adaptations followed. Within decades, cinema made Dracula immortal. Stoker didn't just write a novel, he crystallized the vampire myth. He gave us the dark gentleman in the cape, the kiss at the throat, the mingling of sex and death that we still shiver at today. And we want it. The Count had crossed the threshold, and he never left. So how did the world greet these creatures of the night? Polidori's Vampire in 1819 was a sensation. Published in London's New Monthly magazine, readers thought it was Byron's work, and scandal clung to every line. Imagine it, a vampire who looked like a gentleman, who spoke poetry as easily as he drank blood. Society gasped and kept reading. But Carmilla, half a century later, was different. Published in a little magazine, it never caught fire in its own time. Perhaps its lesbian undertones were too dangerous, too unspeakable. For decades, Carmilla was almost forgotten, until the 20th century, when queer readers and scholars uncovered its daring heartbeat. And then came Dracula, 1897. The novel was reviewed as melodramatic, gruesome, even disgusting. But readers couldn't look away. It spread like wildfire across the English-speaking world, adapted, staged, performed, then immortalized in film. A Van Helsing quote from Dracula. The strength of the vampire is that people will not believe in him. And perhaps that's why he lives on. Because even in doubt, even in denial, the vampire waits at the threshold, needing only an invitation. From the bloated corpse in the village to the pale aristocrat in velvet, the vampire has always been a reflection of us, our fears, our desires, our secret longings. Next time, we sink deeper into the kiss, the bite, the tangled threads of blood and sex that made the vampire one of the most erotic monsters in history. Until then, keep your windows closed. Or don't.